Hello and welcome to Art Out of Nature, Harrison's Cave, Barbados. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. As always, I'm pleased that you have chosen to spend the next 30 minutes with my guest. In last week's program, we ended a look at the early operations of the cave thanks to tour guide coordinator Jolene Gibson, senior tour guide Hyacinth Thompson, and marketing coordinator Joanne Jones. Throughout the years, the cave generally benefited from the expertise of a number of its staff members who remained focused and dedicated on the task that they were performing. Now, maintenance and repair are needed to tackle the inevitable decay and deterioration of building fabric that occur because of climatic conditions, wear and tear by building users, or other threats. After many years of operation, the facility here was in need of not only repair and maintenance, but a total upgrade to take it well into the 21st century. Now, this episode introduces you to yet another local hero of Harrison's Cave, an architect by profession who performed the role of project manager and along with his team engineered the cave's most recent redevelopment. It was a job that required careful and detailed planning, knowledge of technical matters and design. Now, you may call it fatalism or determinism. Architect Steve Devenish was now totally immersed in performing a role that brought him immense pleasure, for it was an opportunity to put into practice the skills he acquired while studying abroad and create something that would position this cave well for future generations. As you listen to him, you get the impression that he was predestined to perform this task. Steve Devenish begins by placing things in the correct perspective.
My involvement in Harrison's Cave is one that, I don't know if it was destined to occur or whatever, but my very first, it forced me to think about it. When I was attending Barbados Community College, there was a man called Otto St. Hill who was then the project manager. And I remember he would come down to classes and you had these mud, this clay on his big Land Rover. And there were drawings in the back of the vehicle which showed contours and landscaping, and I had always been interested in geography and art. So when I looked in, I used to always peep into this vehicle and see these drawings with these contours and stuff like that. And I quietly said to myself, I want to be like to work on something like that. But that would have been back in 1976, 77, 78. Put it out of my mind, there was no issue or no chance of that ever happening. But then when I joined the then Parks and Beaches Commission, and that would have been on March 1st, 1980, we had several contracts for landscaping in Barbados. One would have been here, was Hall the Village. But one of them also was the landscaping work to be carried out at Harrison's Cave. And there was a supervisor, very plant-oriented and full of knowledge man called Timothy Hoyt. He was the supervisor then. And as a draftsman, I was supposed to do the drawings to show where the plants will go. And Harrison's Cave came on my desk. So we were involved in the landscaping at Harrison's Cave. I remember learning about heliconias and frangipanis and ficus and all this sort of stuff. And thought nothing of it. It was good to be involved in a project like that.
You would recall that in 1982, the Parks and Beaches Commission and Caves Authority were amalgamated to form the National Conservation Commission. And that is when Steve's first direct interaction with Harrison's Cave started. Little did he know it was the beginning of a journey where his soon-to-be acquired skills and knowledge would be direct assets.
But however, between then and 1984-85, it was nothing significant until I went away to study architecture and I returned. And on my return, Harrison's Cave was one of several projects we were looking at. At that point in time, we were considering expanding the facilities to improve office accommodation and provide for the staff who were there. We went through several designs and considerations, but at that time there was also a proposal from Felsen King, who was the original architect, which I had to review. And we made several attempts to provide additional accommodation, but none of the designs were really accepted. And then eventually there were several committees we used to sit on then, and it was recognized that to improve the facility, you could not do it in what we call the valley floor because you were hemmed in by the cliff face on both sides.
In addition to the natural limitations here, There were several other factors that merited the expansion work. However, it required very careful planning and coordination. From as early as 1985, Steve Devenish, a then young architect, was tasked with considering proposals to improve the surroundings here. You might ask why, and understandably so. He lists some of the challenges that they were experiencing back then.
On the Wednesday, which was normally a good cruise ship day, you will find that once two tour buses parked, the place blocked off and it rammed, and it was very, very popular, and traffic and taxis were backed up the road, and everybody complained, need more facilities, need more facilities. And then when the trams broke down, that was almost an immediate feast. And the unfortunate thing was that the tram storage facilities was at the southern end of the car park, and the tour was at the northern end. So there was no way when you had a mechanical difficulty to mask that. Everything was unveiled in front of everybody so people could look and see when something happened. But there were several efforts and decisions about how to improve the facility. And then one of the designs I had done at that point in time was for a building at the southern end.
At that point in time, they realized that what was required was a more comprehensive effort. And so they explored the possibility of relocating the car park, which was then situated here in the valley floor, to the cliff top.
In the early days, people were only thinking of moving the car park. But then when we considered it, we felt, why not move the facilities and have people transfer to the bottom? I had worked on a preliminary scheme at that point in time. I presented the government, and when we presented that scheme, there was some skepticism, but also members of the board at that point in time too, but there were some people who were fully supportive of it. I remember Frida Nichols, who's not the port, was one of those who was fairly embracive of it.
There was good news. The government of the day welcomed the idea and was particularly pleased with the recommendations. In fact, the government commended Steve Devenish and his team for the correct approach taken. However, the government held the view that a more comprehensive study was required, where it would see the feasibility of it all before committing government's resources. And so the astute project manager, determined to see this project through.
The argument was also advanced that feasibility studies will take quite some time. In the meantime, the plant had deteriorated to such a point that it needed an instant refurbishment program. So the government of the day then decided we must do the detailed feasibility study, but in the meantime we must look at all the resources required for it to run properly while we are looking at the feasibility study, and hence we named it a two-phase program. One was a short-term refurbishment program, and one was a long-term feasibility study. And even prior to the short-term refurbishment program, there was another issue within the cave where the trams were sliding as they come out the cave, and we had to look at the refurbishment of the roadway, and also to the fleet of 4 trams were very vintage in their technology. And the decision after a failed attempt was taken to get another tram, but we had to have that design and build. So we had the old fleet, which we had to add a tram to. So you end up with a project for 1 more tram, the refurbishment of the roadway, and also all the other things necessary to keep it running steady while we look at a feasibility study.
Now, there lies a problem. Harrison's Cave is top on the list of heritage sites in Barbados. In fact, it is widely known that many tourists who visit Barbados plan their trips well in advance and do so with the view of visiting Harrison's Cave. Now, how could you possibly close this attraction?
Nobody wanted the cave closed. And we also want to look at the electrics, to have the electric refurbishment. So we'd always had agreement on these things, but the critical point is always who will close it and when will it close. And the decision was taken to go ahead with the refurbishment program. The first one was the internal roadway, which was done over on Easter. And I remember this guy, Clark and Associates, a construction firm, we went out to bid if we could get people, and he says, I know how to do this. And we plunged into it, not fully knowing. Clark was the engineer then. He recommended some granite-type stone that came from St. Vincent, and we'd hacked the surface and painted it on with a slurry. And this is the allow for slipping because the existing roadway was done using coral stone. And as the water ran over the surface for a period of time, you will get the erosion of the cement and eventually erosion of the coral. And we went into the cave and we did that over a weekend, full of enthusiasm and not knowing what would happen. And by the Monday when the first tram went in, it started to slide again. So we said, oh boy, have we done the wrong thing? But what had actually happened is that lateness had set in, which is a thin layer of mixture of slurry on the top. So once you power washed it, it was working. Then once we recognized that that worked, because we only used it in these areas where the tram was slipping, the decision was then taken that we can do the internal roadway completely. And that came on as part of the phase 1 refurbishment program, which included putting in an electrical power supply and also refurbishment of some of the buildings and stuff like that.
Now, the refurbishment program is in full operation and the team is pressing ahead. The next major phase was the feasibility study. Now, what was this feasibility study and how important was it for Barbados in general and the cave in particular in light of the then prevailing conditions?
The feasibility study, we thought, came along at a very critical time because by then in the mid-90s, a lot of projects were running in Barbados. We had the tourism development program, we had coastal conservation study phase 2, and we also subsequently had environmental management for land use plan and sustainable development. And all those studies, there were some common things about those studies at a point in time. One of them was Barbados' attempt to truly get community involvement, to get community involvement before the fact rather than after the fact. Another critical thing about that period also too was that these came on the heels of the Sustainable Conference, which was held in Barbados in '94, which was preceded by the Rio Conference in '92. So the whole issue of bringing environmental issues and environmental development was coming to the fore. How do you design in a sustainable way? How do you involve people in design? And that was new to us. And how do you involve the communities?
Now, this is one of the reasons why this project has been so successful. Steve Devenish and his team understood that community participation in project planning and management was essential in enhancing development at the basic community level, a critical tool for sustainability, and acts as a foundation for development at the national level. Their approach served to strengthen self-determination and predispose the community towards a more democratic behavior and development. However, as he sought to do this, he recognized the need to play the balancing act.
There was always a challenge with involving the community in work that's being done in government because some of us felt that you can only tell the community what is happening after the cabinet has approved the project or program, whereas the real thing was to get people involved before that happened, but you still have to balance going to the public with something that has not had government approval yet, so that was a tricky assignment. But those projects I listed helped us develop in many ways. And at that time when I returned from the UK as a qualified architect, I sat on many of these committees then representing the National Conservation Commission. And there were several of us I can remember now who serve on those committees. There's Dr. Bruce at Coastal, there's P.S. Gabriel Springer, who's now in charge of the Independent Secretariat, just to mention a few, two who I remain in daily contact with. And the only difference, what was exciting about that time is that you had a plethora of young people who wanted to do stuff, and we were on these project steering committees. And what was peculiar also was that all that would change when you go to a different meeting with the chairman. Like I chaired the one with Harrison's Cave, and Leo chairs the one at Coastal, Gabriel would chair in tourism. But the projects followed each other, and one of the things that I tried to develop from my own personal perspective, because when I studied architecture, we did something called community architecture. It was basically how you involve people and regular people in design rather than designing for them.
And this became his guiding mantra throughout the project. He too maintained that the community's participation, ownership, and the sustainability of the project had the multiplier effect of enhancing the overall development of the local community here in Welchman Hall and contributing to the country's national development and economic growth. Interestingly enough, in his attempt to reach the community he was seeking to serve, project manager Steve Devenish took an unorthodox approach.
I remember one of the studies, we had a meeting in Queen's Park around 5 o'clock in the evening, and the usual suspects would come, take over the show, not many. Then I remember going to one where we had, on another project, we had a community meeting in Bathsheba, and when we got there, Bathsheba Center was filled but with civil servants and consultants. And on my way down, all the ram shops and the people we wanted to attach. So we moved from having the meetings at peculiar times during the day to going in the afternoon. And then I said, well, when my turn comes for my project, we will have to do it differently. And the different way we pursue the community participation on this project is we decided we will set up in the community amongst the people. And the project will be one that people can access at any point in time. And you will try to engage the people through different communication strategies, and also do the consultants will be based here. And some of those projects, the consultants used to fly in, do a short stint and fly out. And what we encouraged government at that point in time is to have a full-time consultancy here. So the consultants were downstairs and I was upstairs. And basically, we were in the community, so the community could come in at any point in time and talk to the consultants. And that is how we pursue the community component, so that you extract from the community what is important to them. You extract from them an understanding of how they see their space and their environment, and at the same time, you present to them what you're proposing to do in a way that is comfortable to them, at a speed and a condition that suits them. Now, the disadvantage of the community participation thing is that it takes time. It's very unpredictable. You might have a project scheduled for 3, 4, 6 months, but you might be in the community and people don't really respond to you until they feel comfortable with you. So that is why we actually were set up in the community, and that's how the community component evolved, and that has been a significant component of the redevelopment of Harrison's Cave. A lot of people see the physical work and the trams and the lifts, but the community component has been one of the more enjoyable and successful episodes that we pursued. But I would suggest to anybody that that concept did not start with Harrison's Cave. It came out of the whole idea of sustainable development, the Rio Conference, the Barbados Cities Conference, and trying to involve people. So what we were just trying to do is to implement this international movement into project life and project cycles within Barbados. And Harrison's Cave was the point at which it actually came together. So we wouldn't try to claim as the originators. So that's how the location of the office occurred.
While the team might not be the originators of the concept, they are on record as being the first major project in Barbados to take on such an approach to development in the community. Its success, no doubt, ought to be studied and adopted by others considering similar projects in the community. Now, having settled into the new offices, the terms of reference of the feasibility study were developed.
The government of the day suggested that they wanted a comprehensive study which will highlight all resources necessary to put Harrison's Cave on a firm footing for the future. Technical, financial, human resources, environmental. So we developed a very, very, very comprehensive feasibility study. We went out to international tender. There were in excess of 50 submissions. We narrowed down those submissions to 12. Then we narrowed them down to 6, and we invited those to make submissions. Then once there was a selected consultancy, we entered into contract negotiations. Again, during those negotiations, we tried to benefit from what we've seen happen in the other projects. One of the cries for a lot of people was that a lot of these studies going on and we bringing in foreigners to tell us what to do. A lot of these studies going on and people didn't know what's going on with them. So we had those things in the back of our minds, and therefore, when we negotiated with the consultants, we tried to make sure that there were as many as possible Barbadians on the team. We were focusing on technology transfer, and throughout all the projects, a lot of us learned a lot. In fact, I remember the introduction of what everybody thinks as a PowerPoint projector. One of the first times those were used in Barbados was on a tourism project. And it was a projector, it was a big like a sewing machine, and everybody was fascinated by it. By the time it came to us, we were in slim, streamlined projectors. Also, to digital photography, that was a new thing then, and we saw that on the tourism project, and it evolved through the projects until we became fairly competent with digital technology. And another thing we also saw in terms of technology transfer and evolution over that period of time was the digital camera, where the digital camera was used for the first time on the tourism project. Then we saw that on the MLAP project, and then by the time our project came, we moved on a stage further. So in a way, the 90s also saw a certain level of technology transfer and a certain level of development for officers within government, and sometimes we take that for granted.
The evolution of the technology here in Barbados and how it was used by the then young professionals as they sought to make this better for all of us. You would note the team's insistence on having Barbadians working on this project. And of course, you will also note the birth of what was a very popular and successful program held annually in the Welshman Hall community.
There were about 32 consultants in all, and over 60% of them were Barbadians. Wherever possible, we got Barbadians to be located on the team. So it was led by a Canadian firm, but it was predominantly staffed by Barbadian consultants. So we got a lot of Barbadian consultants to work with the overseas consultants, thanks to facilitate technology transfer and stuff like that. But once that study was done, the contract was awarded, that study then ran for a period of about 3 years. It was initially supposed to be 18 months. But one of the things that bumped it up to 3 years was something called integrated nature tourism, which was a concept that came out of the early days with the sustainable ideas. It came through tourism, and we had that as a concept. And they did a proposal for what was then to be known as the Heart of Barbados. And then they came to us and had the proposal neatly written up. We said to them, but why not run a pilot? And we had a long, energetic discussion about that. It's going to cost more money. You guys want me to submit on time, but if we do that, we're going to go with the timeline. And so we came to a conclusion, a negotiated position where we said to them, we will extend the timeline if you run it as a pilot. So they ran the Heart of Barbados as a pilot. And I said, well, if you run it as a pilot, all the difficulties you just told me about, record them as recommendations. So after a bit of duress and stress, the consultants agreed to run it as a pilot. So we ran the Heart of Barbados as a pilot. And all the information that they gathered helped us then to formalize it as a formal program, and then we subsequently continued to run the Heart of Barbados for about 10, 12 years. So again, that pioneering work occurred was the whole advancement of communities participation. The idea of running it as a pilot was to genuinely give people a chance, because we were a bit fed up of writing about community participation, but it never happened. So the pilot was intended to genuinely see what can happen. It was a bit uncontrollable, but people's hearts were in the right places. And there was a genuine feeling from the community that they wanted to be involved. And hence we learned a lot. We developed a lot of trust with people. So the time delayed for the project was worth it in terms of the trust issues. So that set the platform for continuous community research. As a matter of fact, one of our officers, Rosine Reed, she did her master's on that research program. And her research then informed our program the years after. So again, technology transfer of knowledge, advancement of civil servants is factored in with redevelopment.
Once the feasibility program was completed and presented to government, the team looked at a comprehensive proposal in terms of buildings and the environment. They were very careful in the selection of consultants.
There were over 150 recommendations, and government took the decision to pursue with the redevelopment. So then we retained the same consultants to do the detailed design. And the reason why we insisted on that is a lot of the time you have a feasibility study being done by one company, and then when another company takes up the detailed design, they criticize all the things that happened before and say it wasn't done properly. It's like the plumber coming in your house and complaining about the tile, and the tiler complaining about the electrician. So we said, if we keep the same consultants, we'll hold their hands to the fire. So you can't diss the work that's gone before. So we retained the same consultants to do the detailed design. And then the detailed design was completed, and we went out to tender for international bids, and we got a local bid, and the construction work started as a result of that.
You will also note the multifaceted nature of the project and the careful manner in which the team went about selecting the trams.
Now, within the redevelopment process, there were several strands of work that came along. The integrated nature tourism, which then became the Heart of Barbados, as I told you about. Also, too, within that was the idea of the trams. And the trams is another story, one of those things where you should never say never. Because I remember when the trams issues were happening at NCC, and one of the officers who then became very pivotal in the turnaround of the tram concept and the turnaround of maintenance is a guy called Schofield Clark. And he taught me a level maths at the community college. So when I saw him turned up as the maintenance supervisor at Harrison Scave, I said, Schofield, welcome on board, but I tell you something, I would never be involved in trams because I'm an architect and that's a vehicle. Little did I know that that was not true.
The team nevertheless persisted and established very clear guidelines as to how the companies that agreed to submit proposal to build the new trams should proceed.
We set about a very structured way then of looking at the procurement of the existing, to review the existing fleet. And within the detailed design, there was a recommendation. They looked at the whole fleet and they'd recommended a new type of vehicle. We wanted a vehicle in 3 parts that would be more nimble, can get people in and out, that was attractive, that can become a toy, that can become a feature. So all these things were placed in the design, and it landed within the redevelopment project. And I was told, you're the project manager of the project, so you got to get on and deal with it. And I said, oh boy, what do I get myself into? So we ended up with the procurement of a new fleet of trams as part of the redevelopment. But the tram procurement was not tied to the main contractor. That was something we had to do differently. And the way that we went about that was really interesting in that we had a preliminary design which was done by the designers. And then once we had the preliminary design, we put out an international expression of interest, call for expression of interest. As I recall it, there was a company from Portugal who said to me they wanted to be from Brazil and they were interested. But when we said we wanted 7 or 8 vehicles, nah, too little. Then I think we got a written reply from Hyundai, and then it's too little. So you had some international interest, but people were interested if you were doing about 50 or 70 vehicles, but to do 6 vehicles, you're not going to tool per factory for that. So we still persist with it, and we got 3 firms who were interested, and the idea was that those companies will visit Barbados at their own expense, look over the terms of reference, view the site, and then submit a proposal. But we will also visit those companies to make sure that they're valid. So the cycle started where they came here, each of the individual companies on a different schedule. There were two new ones. They looked at the setup and said they were their game. We also made sure the designers of the existing fleet were involved. So one company was in California, one was in Pensacola, another one was in England, in the UK, another one was in Stratford. So they sent their reps down, they looked at it, and they said they have an interest, and then we visited them to see if they were genuine. And then once those two things occurred, then each of them designed a proposal and submitted. We had 3 proposals, and then there was one company that withdrew because the specification we have for the braking system, they were not comfortable, they couldn't guarantee it. So after going through all the initial exchanges and visits, they pulled out, and then we ended with the firm from Stratford, which was Savin Lam. And then we also had a bid from Boyertown, who were the manufacturers of the original vehicle. And that set us on a very long and extensive path for the procurement of the vehicles.
With almost every project, there comes a time when the project manager or his team members might have some second thoughts about the work. Project manager Steve Devenish did have this moment. Thankfully, the team members were guided by their individual expertise, and they persisted.
Another twist occurred where he felt this was really not the place for me to be. When we eventually got a company and we were about to negotiate with them, word came that they were going into voluntary liquidation. So the board quickly convened to take a decision as to how we should proceed and what we should not do. And there's another person, there are lots of people we've come across, but there are people who I found made critical decisions at critical times. And the other person, this was the chairman then, Tony Auden, because we had a very long and exhaustive meeting. And there was a Phoenix company from the company that was going to voluntary liquidation. So there were some people from that company who said, yes, we can still do this contract. But how do you trust a new company? And the board took the decision then that we should visit the UK and speak to the Phoenix company, their suppliers, and their bankers. And then if we are comfortable, then we will enter into contract with them. We took that decision as a board because it was a member of the board then too, because to go back with a tender and start the process all over, you will never get a fleet of vehicles. And everybody recognized that we needed a new fleet of vehicles. So we took that decision, retained a lawyer in the UK to look after our interests in the UK. And that decision was taken on a Thursday, and by Saturday morning, we were in the UK visiting these companies.
Now, careful thought and consideration had to go into the selection of the tram. The tram had to be designed, taking into consideration the peculiarity of Harrison's Cave, of course, all in the hope of procuring the ideal tram. To ensure that all of the transactions were done correctly, the team entered a special contract. What were the special arrangements in this contractual agreement?
Their main thing was that they were a game, but they wanted to be paid directly, and they didn't want to make sure their money were tied up in the company. So we got a contractual arrangement that allowed us to be comfortable, and then we entered into contract with the company for the provision of that fleet of trams. And the contract was such that we wanted to be cautious, so the arrangement was that we will design a prototype. And if we can reach agreement on the prototype, then we have the other 5, because the company wanted to build all 5 together. And we were new to this thing and this technology, so we had the prototype design. The prototype came down, we went to the cave, we tested, we had some challenges, we made lots of changes. And the staff at the cave and the workshop staff were absolutely magnificent, because they had a chance to peruse the vehicle, look at it, make queries, make concern, question things, and the design was changed based on a lot of the information that came from the staff at Harrison's Cave, the workshop, and in particular the drivers and the tour guides. So we made those changes and then proceeded with the final fleet of vehicles. And that was a very rewarding and rich experience, because it then made me realize that people had more confidence in us than we had in ourselves.
It is truly amazing what could ignite in an individual when he recognizes that we believe in him. A good example, a very good lesson in project management and community development. Now, if you were to look around here today and see the work that went into the redevelopment, you would understand why people had placed so much confidence in project manager Steve Devenish and his team that spearheaded the recent work here to bring the facility well into the 21st century. a lesson in good project management and community involvement. This has been Art Out of Nature. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. As always, I'm pleased that you have remained with me. In our next episode, architect and project manager Steve Devenish will continue to walk us through his team's transformational work here at Harrison's Cave. Goodbye for now.